In this video, we'll talk about Express.js route parameters and how you can use them to access data in a dynamic way. You can find the code for the video linked in the description below, and there's also an article version of it if you'd like to use that. So let's get started. Let's start by installing Express.js and setting up a basic server. I'm going to run npm init with the y flag to create a package.json file, and then we can install Express. Npm install Express. Okay, so I'm going to create a file server.js and then create the server here. So we can start by importing Express. So const Express is equal to file Express. Then we can initialize using the app variable is equal to Express, followed by the port. Of course, you can put this in the .env file, but we'll just use this here. So I'm going to use 5000, and then app.listen, passing the ports, and then I use this. Also log. Let's use backticks here. So app is listening on ports. Oh, I missed this. Okay, so let's check if this works. So I'm going to run node watch server.js. Okay, so our app is running on port 5000. So I can close this. Now we can set up the routes. So I'm going to use app.get followed by the routes, and then the request and response parameters. We can just send back hello world. So using the response parameter res.send, so we'll just send hello world. Okay, so if I open this up in the browser, we should have hello world. Okay, great. So next thing I'll do is to add some dummy data to this. So I'm just going to use a JSON file. We'll call this users.json. Yep. And then I'm just going to add some dummy data to this. Yeah. And then back here we can access the data. So I'm just going to import the file I just created now. So users, I'm going to say constants users equal to require then let me add the path /users.json. Remember that the goal of this tutorial is to show you how to use route parameters to access data in a dynamic way. So what I'll do first is show you how to do this without using route parameters. I'm going to try and access each individual data here using their ID. So in the server.js file, I'm going to create a new route. Again, we're going to use app.get, and then I'm going to create a new API route. So we can say API/users. Since I'm looking for user 1, I'm going to use 1 here. Then this is followed by the requests and response parameters. Now we can use define method to filter through the user's objects and then retrieve a particular user that we are looking for. So I'll say constant user 1, is equal to users dot find. Now I'm looking for user one, so we can say user and then an arrow function. So it's going to return the particular user with an ID of 1. So this filters through the users. The find method filters through the user's objects and returns a user with the ID of 1. And then we can send this back. So res.json and user 1. Now let's look at this in the browser to see if it works. I'm going to copy this, and then in the browser I'm going to add this to localhost. Okay, so at this point it returns user 1. But the issue with this is if you have up to 100 users, you have to do this manually for each of them. So for instance, if I'm looking for user 2, I'll have to recreate this and maybe change the routes to 2 and change this also to 2. So that if I go back to the browser and modify the routes, I'll get user 2. So this is the issue with doing this without route parameters. If you have a lot of users, you're going to have to create different routes for them manually. So now let's see how to do this using route parameters in Express.js. So we'll start by getting rid of these routes we created for user 1 and user 2. I'm going to create a new route, app.get, so API/users, and then the parameter. Now, if you're wondering what this is sort of the syntax for creating a route parameter. So it's a colon followed by the name of the parameter you're creating. And we can get access to this ID parameter using the params objects through the request parameter. So I'm going to create requests and response. Then we can do this. Now I'm going to create a new variable called user ID, which we can say is equal to request.params.id. Now we have access to the params objects through this request parameter we created here. And then through the params objects, we can get access to whatever parameter you've created in the routes. So for instance, if we had a different parameter called name, you can access name through the params objects, and then this would be name. In our case, it's ID. So whatever parameter you pass in here, you can access it through the params objects, meaning that if the user types in 2 here, this request.params.id is going to return 2. But at this moment, it's actually returning a string, and we have to convert this to an integer. And we can do that using the passInt function. So I'm just going to pass this back in here. So to explain what this line does again, we are simply using the request objects to get access to the params, which is the request parameters here. And then we are getting access to the ID, which is the parameter created in the URL, or the routes rather. And then we converted this to an integer and then assigned it to a user ID variable. So again, we're going to create const user and filter through this. So users.find, you can say user. So user ID, user ID. So what this line does is to filter through users and return a user with user ID. Now remember that the value of user ID is dependent on what you pass in here. So if this is 2, it means that the value of user ID is going to be 2 here. So users.find just filters through and returns whatever value this is, depending on the data you have here. So if you have an ID of 4 and you pass in 4 here, it's just going to filter through and return 4. So now we can return this in JSON format using the response object. So res.json, and we can pass in user. Yeah. So now we can test this out in the browser to see if it works. So here I'm going to type in API. Okay. So we can use user 1, and this returns the user with the ID of 1. If I change this to 2, I'm going to get the user with the ID of 2. Again, if I keep changing it to 3 and 4 and all that, I get those users. At this point, I've not implemented the logic for users that don't exist because that's outside the scope of this tutorial. So 6 is probably going to return nothing, yeah. So you can implement that on your own, but the whole idea of this tutorial is to show you how route parameters work. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this video very helpful. You can find the code linked in the description below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.